There you go. Okay. Welcome and thank you so much. Well, here's Ron.
Thank you, Julie. Everyone hear me? Do I need this?
Yes, yes.
You can hear me? I do need it? Really?
Yeah, to the back of the room you do, Ron.
To the back of the room. Can you hear me now? I like saying that. Usually my job here at the library doesn't pertain to public speaking. Usually muttering other words underneath my breath because this cooling unit or that cooling unit or this thing or that faucet broke and then I have to go fix it. So I have done public speaking before, and in fact this presentation that I'm going to give to you is an adaptation of the presentation that I was involved with in leadership of last year. I did not know of the school. I knew of a building when I was a kid. My family moved here about 1965 in the area, and once I got my driver's license, you go all over the place. And Seymour in '65 wasn't as big as it is now. It only took you 5 minutes to get from one end of the town to the other, and that's when I figured out that's how Mom knew I wasn't home at the right time. Always wondered that when I was younger. But I came across this building many times, traveling with, or going around, hanging around with friends that lived over on Laurel Street, Oak Street. In fact, I got invited a couple times to a church. Never thought much about it. Now the friends that I was running around with, some were black, some were white, all living in the same neighborhood. They said, hey, you want to come over to church with us? I said, yeah, I can do that. So I went and asked my mom. She said, yeah, but remember, you have to behave like you do in our church. Well, okay. So what was different though was it was a nice little church. It still stands on a corner down here at Tipton and Lynn Street. But there were an awful lot of African American people sitting in the church. And I'm thinking as a very young teenager, what am I doing? Why am I here? But over the time, friendships grew. And those people that invited me to that church, not only white but black, became very good friends through school. So it's in their honor that I do this project. Can you go back to that first slide, Don? Don's going to handle my IT person for the day because when I put these slides together, I didn't get them in one format, and so they're kind of different around. So this is so far of my research. Oh, and I do want to make the statement. If there's anything wrong with my speaking today in dates or names, blame Charlotte. No, you're welcome, Charlotte. Charlotte and I have a good working relationship when she worked here, and I really trust her being a historian. I trust her in genealogy work. She's very thorough. She's taught me a lot. And when we get to the second slide, she told me even though it's in the paper, it's not always correct. And sorry, Zach, but that stands true with a lot of going on in the Seymour Daily Tribune when I was a kid. But anyway, you always have to fact check everything. And I know there's a lot of that going on today in society. But Charlotte, a lot of the information I was able to pull up was what some that Charlotte had obtained earlier. The pamphlet that you have, those first 4 pages there, those are information that Charlotte had compiled. So I wanted to make sure that those are pretty detailed. It's articles that came out of not only the Seymour Daily Tribune, the Seymour Republican, the Seymour Democrat, and even the Brownstown Banner. It's amazing that if you live in Brownstown, what information is published about Seymour, especially when you go back into the late 1800s and early 1900s. there's more so in Brownstown mentioned than Seymour. And some of the articles I can see why. This is one of the earliest photos that I could find. In fact, I think Billy Wynn gets credit for this one because she had done an article several years ago on the schools of the Seymour Community Schools. And there was another photo that she had also had done, but one of the reasons I like this, now what you have to visualize on this building was built in the late 1869 to 1870. It was opened as a school in 1870, the same year that Meade Shields gave the property for the current, or what was the current Shields High School, or just at that time, Shields School. It was originally a 4-room building that housed not only the high school, but also the elementary. And in 1870, there was just 2 schools in Seymour. Shields, over between 4th and 5th Street, across from Redeemer Lutheran Church, that I went to junior high at when I was a youngster. I was the last freshman class that left to go to high school as a sophomore. And then this building. Now what you see is this building, this is probably late 50s, early 60s. And because of the upside down sign that you see leaning against there, it says Seymour Jackson County Goodwill Center. And I know they did not have 7-Up back in 1870. They did not have the use of aluminum awnings over the 2 front doors, or actually the one front door and the one entry door. And in 1870, we didn't have the use of electric lights. Also, those were added later, and I'll mention that later too. But this is what the building did look like originally when it was constructed in 1870, and then opened as a 2-room schoolhouse. The building is brick, sand bricks. They were made on the spot, on site. Travis Carter was the company that did it. Some of you, especially in the Delson history, Travis Carter was a very big construction company for Seymour. Seymour was growing very fast in the 1850s, all the way through up 1870 and 1900s. Travis Carter also built the original Carnegie Library, which is on this northeast corner of the building, still standing today. Those are used clay brick, whereas this is sand brick. These brick walls are about 2 foot thick. Where it had been painted on the outside of the building that still stands today, those bricks are preserved. Where the exposure of elements on the south side after the one south portion of the building got tore down because of fire, those are deteriorating. But we'll get into that. So it opened up as a school in 1870. Seymour had the 2 schools. Can you go to the next slide, Don? The best that we can come up with is that we do know by newspaper articles and some other information that we've obtained that this should be classified as Mr. John Newby. He was the first black teacher in the school when it opened up. And when we got to looking at that photograph and looking further, you'll see a photograph of Reverend Maddox. It almost looks like the 2 could be brothers. John Newby is a grandfather, maternal grandfather of Mr. Maddox. So they look very, very similar. And I don't want to use the cliche, they all look alike, they don't. I did see a picture of Reverend Lee, or Professor Lee, and this is not matching. So Mr. Bully was a great teacher and a great historian. But this was in the back of his book, so I don't know if this is a haste to get the book done. But The time period is right, 1870. That is a photograph of Mr. Newby, who was also one of the builders of the school. Before he became a teacher, he was a brick mason, as well as John Maddox, which is Reverend Maddox's great-grandfather, and William Maddox, which was Edgar Maddox, Reverend Maddox's father. All learned the trade of brick mason. They were employed by Travis Carter Construction Company here in Seymour. They not only did, like I mentioned, the library here in 1904, 1905. They also built Laurel Street School, or Laurel, now it's kind of called Laurel Place. The hospital just acquired it back, and they're put offices in there. Several buildings throughout Seymour, and one of the, I think, three remodel jobs at Jackson County Courthouse. Travis Carter Company did that. And so those gentlemen that, like John Maddox and John Newby, learned the trade of construction work, and helped build the school. This gentleman got to help teach his kids, and really provided a very big part in the education. Moving on the next slide then. This was found, I just come across this late Friday afternoon, and I thought, when I found it, I thought when the date of the article that was originally published, I didn't think much of it, and I got my mind in the wrong decade, or the wrong era, and I was thinking 76, oh wow, this is back when I was I went to college then, and so actually when I got married. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is 1876. This actually was found many years ago. This is from a newspaper article in 1922. It was found in a clipping. This is a report of the clipping of the school board letter, a letter to the school board, to the community, on the conditions of the two schools and what was going on. It was a school board report. And then there's a second page left on. It's very hard to read on this side, but there is a mention, and I can read it for you. It's on the second column. I'll just start at the top. It says that we have, and this is speaking of the Shield School first. It speaks of the Shield School. It says we have a large, beautiful building on attractive and pleasant grounds, also a driven well, which afforded simple drinking water for the entire school. This was in 1876. That was the school report. They didn't have drinking water at that time, running water in their building either. Also a network of underground drainage, of conduits, all of the water to direct the water from the roof and wastewater from the well, and leaving the students from inconveniences of mud and water upon the ground. We also have built a neat, comfortable building for the colored citizens on a large, nice lot, well enclosed, and set some trees upon it, making a desirable situation, thus offering the colored people of our place an inducement to make an effort to educate their children and to elevate themselves to become intelligent citizens. We are glad to say that they are now making some effort in this direction, and as compared with the colored school of 3 or 4 years ago, is a very marked improvement. You notice there wasn't any mention of putting water in the building? They didn't have a restroom facility either. That'll come up later. Next slide. No, you won't stop. Just go back to the other one. That's going to be jumping. So, there's a lot of newspaper articles that we came across that were talking about the population, the enrollment of the school. At one time, the school had close to 100 kids in those 2 rooms. These rooms are only 35 by 50 feet. That's outside dimension. And the only reason I know that because our architect measured them for our project. Not very big. No amenities in it originally. There's just a floor, 4 walls. There's a little hallway that was in between a corridor, which is actually the main entrance, and then you split off to one room or the other. That was it. No amenities in there. There was the old-fashioned toilet facilities out the back, but there was no other thing. We also believe, if we go back to that photo, and if you look back, we also believe too that there was those are not some of the windows around the sides on the building are not the original windows. Those were added later. Just me here, Dawn. This one here, that's a PDF file. That's the church building. That'll fit a little different. And this is where it comes into play where I didn't do my work. I mentioned going to a church. This is the church, but this is a photograph of the church in 1916. Mentioned 100 kids going through the school at that time. There's over 200 church members in that church. Look at the kids. It's not the best photograph, but we had a large contingent of African Americans living here in Seymour, all the way through the early 1900s. Shortly thereafter, though, the enrollment of the school, as you go through and into the 20s, 1920, 1921, 22, all the way up to the end of the time period, the enrollment goes down. It's 23, 25, 11. There's only 11 students the last year. And then out of those 11, 5 were not going to be retained at the school. They were to go on to the middle school at that time, to go over to Shields Middle School. So, as Professor Lee mentioned migration, there was a lot of migration getting out of Seymour for blacks at that time. A lot of it was economic conditions. Hardly any of them could find work. And so they went where they could go. A lot of them, they'd go to Indianapolis, Detroit area, Chicago. And so that's where a lot of them went. Later in around 1929, State Board of Health came in by the order of the State Superintendent of Schools to do an assessment on all school property throughout the state. It was to be completed by 1930. And in his assessment, he assessed that the Lynn Street School be condemned. Not because of the building falling down, inadequate lighting, both natural and artificial. I did not know that. I don't know if those of you who were teachers, I didn't know if you knew that there had to be a certain, for floor space, you had to have so much natural lighting coming into a building. Did not know that. Lynn Street School did not match that criteria. The lack of adequate heating. Used a wood stove. like most people did at that time. But you're heating 2 rooms, both of them 35 by 50, was kind of hard. And with only 1 floor and a tall building, high ceilings. Also, the inadequate use of restroom facilities. I guess the outhouse was not the best. So they recommended that the place be, they gave the school corporation, or not at that time, a school board, 3 options. 1, you could remodel it, bring it up to code. 2, you can tear it down, start all over. Or 3, sell the property and integrate the kids. School board decided on the option 3. At that time, it would have cost, with the number of kids, it was costing the school board $255 a student a year to teach and educate those kids. And for the tax money that they were getting for the schools, for the population at the time, did not warrant it. So the school building got closed. School put the building up for sale in 1929, put it up to the highest bidder. And that next one, 5. I love technology. It's only great when it works. Reverend Maddox, at that time was just known as Edward Maddox because he wasn't a reverend until 1940. Didn't get ordained until 1940. He bought the 3 pieces of property. There actually is 3 pieces of property. There's 2 pieces of property that the school sits on. Now the school actually sits on 1 piece. There's a hole where the other piece was. The other empty lot that's still there too is where Reverend Maddox's house used to sit. It's in between the school and the church. He bought the 3 pieces of property in 1930 at the sum of $610. His idea for him and his wife was to open up a center that they could assist the poor. Not all black, but white. He would go to the river and fish all day, come back, and then let friends know, I have food. If you need it, come get it. More than he could eat, more than his family. But he assisted those. He would go around and collect not only food, clothing, to help those who needed it. He did this all on his own, him and his wife. His intent was to open up a Goodwill Center, use those buildings for that purpose, to help the community out. Next one, please. Yeah. Should be a PDF. No. In the time of Reverend Maddox buying the building, and I'll just do this from memory, hopefully the memory's good, that building was used for more than one thing. At one time it was also used as another church, not for the Bethel AME church that was already there. That was built in the early 1900s, I think 1902, 1904, when that was built. It was another church, it's actually an apostolic church, that is down Laurel Street. And I believe that church still stands. It's been remodeled somewhat. But they used one of the rooms as a church house until they purchased later from Freeman Field, from the Army Air Force Base, they purchased the chapel. So while they were doing that and saving money and doing that, Reverend Maddox let them use that as a church. In the 1940s, during the construction of Freeman Field, there has to be a place to house workers. And a lot of these workers that did come in working to build the construction of the airfield was African American. Not a lot of places, not a lot of motels, not a lot of places that was going to let blacks stay. So the blacks in the community housed 50 to 60 workers. In the school, Reverend Maddox took those 2 buildings and converted those over to apartments and housed 20 to 30 men and women. Some brought their wives. There are 2 accounts of 2 fires that were in, really in the south side of the building. And this is one of the reasons why the south side is no longer there. 2 fires in the building. One was a kerosene lantern that exploded while the ladies were fixing lunch for their husbands that was going to come back from the field and eat. And so the fire department had to come and put that out. In the process, no one got hurt except for the fire chief. He slipped on something and cut his forehead open, but nothing major. But they were able to save and just clean up and save and go on. The building was still used. And a little bit later, there was another little fire going on too. I do want to mention, and I forgot to mention this in my mind, in 1922, Seymour was accredited for a drive-by shooting. We're not usually accredited for that, but there is a newspaper report in 1922 that a student was playing in the schoolyard. Someone driving by with a long rifle took a shot the student in the leg. He survived. They never did find out who did it though. But there was a drive-by shooting in Seymour, Indiana in 1922. But back to the World War II. Yeah, we heard that. In December 4th, 1931, Reverend Maddox, Edward Maddox, was named as the, it was in receipt of a letter from the governor of Indiana at the time, Harry Leslie, which used to, yep, be up at Notre Dame. No, I'm sorry, Purdue. As he was the chairman for the relief of the colored people in Jackson County. In 1931, this is really prior to him starting to what he was going to be doing in the future. He will work in conjunction with the state relief department and is waiting his instructions from them. So he was already connected with the state in poor relief and the aid to others. Throughout the history of Seymour, we have had several other notable members of the black community in Seymour. In this article mentions D.W. Kane. Now this is where some of the facts are wrong. I'm not sure which one until I can able to access the school records. But in some articles, D.W. Kane was a teacher at the colored school for over 25 years. Some mention 37 years, some mention 27. Not too really sure how many years, but he was there for a long time. But D.W. also was another important man throughout the state. Seymour Colored Masonic Lodge, when it functioned, met in a hall at the Hancock Building, which from this date of the article was now the third floor over Adler's, now on 2nd and Chestnut Street. In 1896, the Seymour Colored Masonic Lodge entertained the State Lodge, Grand Lodge at Seymour when the late D.W. Kane was Grand Marshal, or Grand Master of the state of Indiana. Kane was a teacher at the old Lynn Street School for 45 years. So, and he was a Grand Master for 23 years. It also mentions Reverend Maddox has a group photo taken in 1899 Masonic meeting at the old Bethel AME Church on South Pine Street, where the Franklin Junkyard is now. Now Franklin Junkyard's gone. That would be where Smith and Connor Eye Clinic is now. The old church is, at that time the old church was still standing, but then they did build a new church later, which is what stands now. At that time, several hundred colored people lived in Seymour. Several colored farmers lived in the community. Some owned nice farms, which was now South Walnut Street. At that time, South Walnut Street, when you get past Laurel Street and Jackson, you're in the country at that time. That was the county. It wasn't part of the Seymour limits, just went that far. Some owned farms on South Walnut Street with quite a settlement also on Yankee Road south of there, and of course Yankee Road further down the Farmington area. That's where the Quakers were at, and that's where a lot of the settlement happened originally before they moved into town, getting opportunities to move and own property. They worked on farms and in brickyards, and the Reverend Maddox's maternal grandfather, John Newby, was the first colored school teacher in Jackson County. Reverend Maddox's father, John Maddox, in his younger days learned to be a brick molder when brick was made by hand. In later years, he became a barber. In later years also, his dad moved to Indianapolis. Reverend Maddox went with him in his early days, learned the trade of being a barber, came back to Seymour, and at one time operated many different barbershops. And in the reports I've read, the barbershops are not only visited by blacks, but also many, many whites. So he had many different clientele and served different things. All the years that he became a minister, none of the money that he became a minister, he accepted no money of that. That was God's work. And he said, I take no money from that. Everything that he did in his life came from what he did outside. He took no money from helping the poor. So his job as a barber, him and his wife also owned a little restaurant called the Dewdrop Inn. That ended up burning down. He also, there's another, they also had a cleaner. Him and his wife and his daughter, Blanche, they cleaned lodges, homes, offices, all that money. That's what they used to live on. The money he did for social work and for the church work were all did not receive any money at all. Right here. Yeah. This is out of the back of Mr. Bowley's book, and this was in a section of his book called Other Distinguished Citizens of Seymour, or Jackson County. The lower photo is of Reverend Maddox. I'm not sure when that was actually taken, but he did die in June 1973. He attended the school in the building in the house. The house is the center. His grandfather before him had taught at that facility. He was, the center started in the basement of the church in 1949. By 1960, the center had outgrown the basement and they moved it to the former black school, which at that time was over 100 years old. Goodwill service was free, interracial, with food and clothing being distributed to the basis of the needs. The center provided annual holiday dinners at Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Eve. I do have I don't want to disturb your basketballs, especially that one. We did when we did come across going through the building through our leadership project, we came across a stack of these papers, and we were able to get a couple of them that were in very good shape. But these were normal letters that Reverend Maddox hand typed and then sent out to the businesses, and also announcing that the 12th annual, this is 1962 Christmas and Thanksgiving, free dinners to those in need. So if you needed a dinner at that time, this was published, and this is sent out all over to area churches and to other social groups. I really feel, also it mentions about donating items, unused items to the facility to give to those in need. And it says that we are asking for new and used radios to place in the homes for the poor and the needy people at Christmas. It's a real pleasure to make sure old people and shut-ins feel a real Christian spirit and that Christ cares for them. That one lady could not get to church, but she was able to, by the donation of a radio, she was able to listen to God's word, and it pleased her heart. She passed away the last year. And then there was a letter that Reverend Maddox every year, this is dated 1964, Dear Businessman, and it's just asking for donations. If you can't donate in monetary, can you give us food items? And they have a list of stuff that they need to help put on these dinners. And the other thing in 1964, and this started long before that, the Seymour Bethel AME Church, the 45th Annual Fellowship Homecoming Camp Meeting. And I remember my early days, just after 1964, of going by the church and watching these festivals and these revivals going on. They called it Homecoming Day. And they went and invited everyone that attended the church in the past and also attended the school to come back to Seymour. And then they also invited all communities that Reverend Maddox was able to reach out to. Up in the upper corner, you'll see another photograph. That is Walking Bill Smith, the singing evangelist, and his wife, Blanche. That is Reverend Maddox's daughter. She took over for him at the Goodwill Center and also did some other work at the church up until her death. And Blanche, as we were part of the Shelton family artifacts that we have in the display case out there are two records that were recorded by that couple, and Mrs. Shelton sitting over here was the background singer on one of those records. So we're very proud and pleased to have that. Go to these photos down here. I'm going to close with this. These are the photos. This is the after photo. So what you see, the Lynn Street Colored School and Center of Goodwill. That's what the school is called now. That is a nonprofit organization incorporated, 501c3. We're asking for donations. We're not going to pass that today, though. We had a group of people that were able to go through the building when we first started with Indiana Landmarks, Greg Sekula, and several other people, some community people. We actually finally opened the doors for the first time since the mid-60s. And was able to take out everything that was in the building and go through it. If you just go through those slides from there on, if you can. This is actually two projects: the cleanup of the inside of the building, and then the United Way Day of Caring came in May of last year, and we cleaned up the outside. And as you go to the next couple of slides, that's actually the west side of the building. And then one more. This is the south side. That's where the other building was attached to. That building, the foundation, the brick foundation, you can still see where it's at. We have contacted a brick mason who's good at restoring sand brick, and he thinks we have enough brick to do this. Keep going. So a little bit more of the deterioration over years. Another one there. That brick is what we were able to save off the lot that day on the day of carrying. We palletized it, wrapped it up, and we think we have enough to rebuild that one whole south side of it. Keep going. These next, I love Reverend Maddox's choice of color. I don't know if it's just whatever he was able to get a hold of at the time. These, of what you see in this building, are from the time period of the 1940 and through the time that they used it as a Goodwill Center. You're going to see, especially here on the downstairs, you see another second floor. That is not original for the school. There was no second floor in the school. There was just an attic. Keep going. That goes all the way back. There actually is a sink setting. You can see the back of the sink. Stainless steel sink. That's where they did the dishes back in there. One more. I was just looking the outside. For the inside, those we don't think are the original doors, but the original windows on the two sides, the wood frame windows, are still there. The frames are. Some of the glass and one of the panes are still there too. But you can see the construction. Every place that he needed to store something for someone, he put, and he just kept adding to it. Go ahead. This was a kitchen area, and there actually is a bathroom, one of 3 bathrooms in this building now, that they used in the 1940s. Go ahead. And this is the back area. Keep going. This is actually up on that second floor. That ceiling that you see there, this part of it's falling down, that is actually the original ceiling from the school in 1930, from the 30s. Keep going. It is awful dark in there because there is no light, there's no electric to the building. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that the workers from Freeman Field were housed in here. Several of them did not have spouses. The ones that had spouses were in the south building. The ones that lived in the north building, most of them slept on these cots. These are still remaining. There was 2 rods and 2 boards that went length of the building, the 53 feet from one end to the other, and these slats were placed on those rods, and they're just wide enough and long enough for a person, for a sleeping bag or blanket or whatever, and that's what they slept on. There originally were 2 sets of those, both sides. So what we were able to count, we've got about 6 of them left. They were just left up there over time. Nothing, there was a few trash cans and stuff up there. But so this is part of the 1940 history of the use of this building. Go ahead. You can see a little bit better of it. Then go. As I mentioned, there was 2 fires in 1940 and 41, 1944. In 1968, there was a bigger fire. Reverend Maddox was sitting at home eating dinner. They just got done with work over in the, closed up the center for the day, and they noticed smoke. And this is the result of that. That it actually came up, started in the south building, came up and charred up the upstairs. Go ahead. It damaged the subflooring for the roof, but it charred some of the timber. But this is one of the things that we have to do as a board to get it fixed and stabilized. There was a hole in the roof when we took over, but that was from a tree limb falling down through it, and that got covered up and sealed up. That's what the church used to look like, and there should be another photo of now the church. It's still a working congregation, less than 10 people, but Go ahead and go to the next one. You have that photo with you. This is the architect rendering. This is what the family and the board of the Lynn Street School want it to look like. They want it to be a museum. So the present building that still stands, we want to take that and make that a working museum and a working classroom so that great school kids can come in and experience life of a classroom at a time anywhere from 1870 to 1920 in a one-room schoolhouse. But you also see there is a nice glass corridor in between that kind of mimics what originally was there. They forgot to, that's not the roof line though of that corridor, and we mentioned that to the architect. But, and the second building, the building that's not there now that got tore down, we would like to open that up as a community center for use for anyone who wants to use it. And then also use that in there to display artifacts from the time period that this building was in operation. So for Reverend Maddox and all those else involved. And so to restore and to keep this history going on. So I'm going to end my program here now. Is there any questions? Anybody have any questions, especially for Professor Pierce? Or yes?
While you're on that post there, the barber shop was in an old barracks building just west of the church there. I've had my hair cut in there back in February.
Did you do a good job?
Well, it worked at the time. And then I think the next, right in the same building was a mention was a dentist. Am I correct about this? I think so.
They
I think
been
they
before
were
my
both in
time
the
around.
same building there. It was a barracks building just west of the church there.
I do know that Reverend Maddox, from a newspaper article in the North Vernon Times in 1911, he had a barber shop downtown Seymour in the second floor, right close by to the Union Hardware. And there was a fire in that and took out 5 businesses, including the livery stable, All Brands livery stable that was there too.
And the other thing was that Becky Brewer told me about 2 or 3 years ago, before we had our tour of the Underground Railroad and so forth, that they had moved into a house up on All Brown Orchard up there. It's down the Oxmoor Edition up on the hill there. The building's still standing there, and it had a tunnel that went out into the west of into the thicket there, and also Dick Crumpton's authority on all this stuff too. They had a what they call the hut and patch that's due west of there. And this ties in with your farmers that was down in that area there, which meant that they had a little patch, for a garden and a residence or a hut or a shanty or whatever it might be in that area.
Yeah.
There it all ties in on the thing.
We were concerned, we had a question ourselves as a group of what happened to all the brick from the building, the original building that got tore down. And then we did find out, and I think Pastor Sandra, you and some others, there's a house on the way to Brownstown that Reverend Maddox gave them the brick. Said you need it, and so there's a house that was he was doing some reconstruction and adding on, and he wanted time period bricks, and so those bricks from Lynn Street School are used on a house on the way to Brownstown. Yes.
I was the house I lived in here in Seymour. Part of the folklore of that house is it was part of the Underground Railroad. It sits on the corner of Chestnut and Laurel, next to the Washington School.
Yes.
And growing up, all of the black families went to that school. So I know back at least till the late early 30s.
Bobby Edmonds walked into Washington School in 1930, 4th grade.
Yep.
Yes, Margaret Scott, she's been releasing some stuff on the history of Washington School, which actually is what Laurel School, it got changed, the name got changed later to Washington School. And I think, didn't you post on Facebook, there was a photograph of 1960, around 62, 63 kindergarten class. Those are all my classmates. So I go, oh, finally, I got to see what they looked like when they were that little. So, but I recognize several of them.
I
Yes.
have pictures back.
Ron, should this get set up as a museum for students, who will the contact person be?
The contact will be you can contact me here at the library, or you can get a hold of members of the Shelton family. We are really going through some, do what? I don't know everybody's, my name though, that's the thing. Pastor Sandra Gentry, Pastor, would you like to, she's waving her hand, she doesn't want to stand.
You were waiting when I said your name.
She's a wonderful lady, and she's helped really, when we first got this project, she helped a lot with spearheading and expressing the wishes of the family on wanting to preserve this. And so it's, her and I we're trying to work together on grant writing and getting that going, because this is not going to be cheap. Now, I know, and let me say this, because I know there's several people in here involved with the Seymour Museum and also with the Jackson County History Center. This in no way do we want to go into competition with any three, between the three. But what we want to do is make it a part, and hopefully make all three a connecting part. So this has its own history tied to it specifically, but it's a large part of the Jackson County history. It has a large part of Seymour history. And so we want, hopefully, that we can, all three groups can work together. I know that Jackson County History Center has those working classrooms for younger kids to go through there to the county sometime. I don't know, I can't remember what grade it is, but I know that they go in there and do that. And we want to extend that out once we get this up and going and rehabbed to where we can have people inside the building. Then everything that you saw inside that building, that all has to come out. But before we can take it out, we have to make sure that these bricks that have been on these walls since 1870 are all still safe and secure. And so our preliminary cost, and this is ballpark, our preliminary cost just on the one half of the building that's still standing is around $300,000. I know that's not near to what Seymour Museum is facing in the millions, well in the millions, 3 million. Yeah, and we haven't even started thinking about what this other section is going to cost us. So we're just focusing on getting the one half and getting it up and going. So that's our short term, maybe long term, but we're on our way. We have a GoFundMe page. We're seeking grants. We've gotten a few grants to do what we have done, and we're going to be doing a lot more. We're going to put connect with businesses and stuff, and we're going to approach it the way Reverend Maddox approached it. It's a place of need, and it needs help. So we're going to ask the people of the community to help. So if they can't help dollar-wise, come. And I do know that the family, those members of Bethel Community Church over on 4th and Calvin, is that right? They've already started the tradition last fall of free lunches. Was that Saturdays or Sundays?
Sundays.
On Sundays. So if you ever want a free meal, they're going to announce it again when they start that back up in good weather. If you want a good meal, come.
This year, especially the Center for Congregations, the Goodwill Foundation, is focusing on giving grants to community centers that are affiliated with
And I think a couple of the members, Kay and Pastor Sander, have been going. Is that the one you've been going to?
That one is Sacred Places.
Sacred Places.
Sacred Places. But we also did just recently go to the Center for Congregations and we're applying for a grant.
Yeah. So, and to answer your question, you can contact me here. I'm probably the easiest one out of all to get a hold of. So you can contact me here. And then we do have a Facebook page, and you can follow us. And we are in the process of getting a website up and going, and so that people know where we're at, and so they just don't go by. It's really helped. Before, you couldn't see the building from the road. but the hospital went and tore down the Reddick's garage, and now you get to see this building stand there with this nice white and green plaque sitting out in front in the corner, and so everyone can see it now, and it's very visible. So it's no longer standing and hid behind another big building or something. So yes.
I'm a bit confused on two things. Number one, the Shelton family. Are you descendants of Maddox?
Reverend Maddox family, yes.
Okay. So he would have been like your great-grandfather? Or?
Mrs. Shelton sitting over here on the corner. This is Blanche's daughter.
Oh, all right.
It's not, it's her daughter-in-law.
And then,
Daughter-in-law?
oh, okay, mother-in-law. I'll let Kay let you do that because Kay knows. This is Kay Shelton.
Okay.
Okay, well, great-granddaughter of Reverend Maddox. My brother Irvin, great-grandson. We've lived here most of our lives. That's my nephew Aaron and Lily.
Okay. And then I have one other question, real close to the beginning. The picture of the faculty of the colored school. Were those classes, or I mean, were those students as well as faculty?
No, that was
Because
all the
a lot-
faculty.
It's a whole school system.
That was,
That was,
Oh,
That was just all the teachers.
In Jackson County.
No, and
No.
Seymour.
Just
Seymour.
Seymour, just the Shield School,
Oh, all right.
and
Okay.
so most of all those teachers, because when it first opened up, they only had one teacher. Later they did, as enrollment increased, they did go to two teachers. Especially during the time that D.W. King was there, in those 20 to 40 years, whichever I get to settle on. There was usually two teachers there at that time. It was later, closer into the 20s, early 20s, that it went back to one teacher
yeah.
because the enrollment just dropped so much.
And was it 1st through 8th grade or 1st through 12th grade?
First through 8th.
1 through 8.
Once the middle school, the junior high officially got started over in the Shields building, and they started separating the younger kids and stuff. Once the other kids, the other elementary schools started up, then no longer was that building used for grade school and high school. Then they separated junior high, senior high. So 7th and 8th, and then 9th through 12th. And at that time, when that happened, then from 6th grade, from after 6th grade, then they went to the Shields. So, but at first starting, it was all the way up to high school, and then they went to the Shields. They did Shields High School, graduated from Shields. I do know that in doing my research, Professor Lee, which he was called, Frank Lee, one of the latter teachers, all his 7 kids went to school at Lynn Street School. They all went through Seymour High School, and his one daughter was a graduate of Indiana University.
Yes.
So I do know that. That was on his obituary up from, I think, up from Franklin. Any other questions? Any questions for Professor Lee? Pierce, I'm sorry. No, I need a drink. I'll admit it, I'll need a drink. Any other questions? I really thank you all for coming. It's
You can fill out evaluation forms that were left on your seats. It's voluntary, but we give them for you. Ron's gonna get set up, and I think we're gonna give out the door prizes. Did everybody fill out a door prize slip? If you came in late and did not, they're on the back table there. We can wait till after Ron's done speaking if people wanna grab those. Our second speaker is Ron Duncan, who works for the Jackson County Public Library. He's also a graduate of the Leadership Jackson County class of 2017, and a member of the history project for the class that assisted the Shelton family and friends in their efforts to restore the Lynn Street Colored School building and turn it into a museum. If you don't know where the Lynn Street School is, it's actually, the official address is 208 South Lynn Street. Most people here probably know where that is, I'm thinking, right? If you want to drive by there afterwards, it's at 208 Southland. We're honored to have with us today other members of that group of individuals and members of the Shelton family. We have some reserved seating up here. I'm so thrilled that you're all here. That's so wonderful. And they own the property and the building, which is now called Lynn Street Colored School Center of Goodwill building. They've also loaned us artifacts for display in our lobby case that you may have, if you came past that. There are some wonderful artifacts in the case if you want to view those afterwards. Okay, did everybody get a slip? Can you raise your hand if you didn't, and we'll get you in there real quick? Okay. Give me about 2 minutes.
Does everybody have one?
We got the handouts. I forgot to say those were coming too, but have some handouts.
I'm sorry.
Kindergarten teacher Jackson.
Are you related to the My last name is Slater. Lynn Slater. Possibly the hospital girl at one time.
The first door prize is, as I said, the fall 2016 issue of Trace's magazine, in which Dr. Pierce's article appears on certain neighbors, and he's graciously signed it for us. Thank you so much. Charlotte. I promise that wasn't rigged, but I know it will be in good hands. So,
Thank you.
Just don't lose it.
and then we have the poster by Nick Walden of Jackson County.
I think they have them at the visitor center, and they have a couple at the visitor center, and
He's very involved with the Medora Bridge group, among others. He's one of the best boosters that Medora ever had. We'll say that. He's great. Nancy DeLaro. There you are. There you are. Okay. Welcome and thank you so much. Well, here's Ron.
Thank you, Julie. Everyone hear me? Do I need this?
Yes, yes.
You can hear me? I do need it? Really?
Yeah, to the back of the room you do run.
To the back of the room. Can you hear me now? I like saying that. Usually my job here at the library doesn't pertain to public speaking. Usually muttering other words underneath my breath because this cooling unit or that cooling unit or this thing or that faucet broke and then I have to go fix it. So I have done public speaking before, and in fact this presentation that I'm going to give to you is an adaptation of the presentation that I was involved with in leadership of last year. I did not know of the school. I knew of a building when I was a kid. My family moved here about 1965 in the area. And once I got my driver's license, you go all over the place. And Seymour in '65 wasn't as big as it is now. It only took you 5 minutes to get from one end of the town to the other. And that's when I figured out that's how Mom knew I wasn't home at the right time. Always wondered that when I was younger. But I came across this building many times. Traveling with, or going around, hanging around with friends that lived over on Laurel Street, Oak Street. In fact, I got invited a couple times to a church. Never thought much about it. Now the friends that I was running around with, some were black, some were white, all living in the same neighborhood. They said, hey, you want to come over to church with us? I said, yeah, I can do that. So I went and asked my mom. She said, yeah, but remember, you have to behave like you do in our church. Well, okay. So what was different though was it was a nice little church. It still stands on a corner down here at Tipton and Lynn Street. But there were an awful lot of African American people sitting in the church. And I'm thinking as a very young teenager, what am I doing? Why am I here? But over the time, friendships grew. And those people that invited me to that church, not only white but black, became very good friends through school. So it's in their honor that I do this project. Can you go back to that first slide, Don? Don's going to handle my IT person for the day because when I put these slides together, I didn't get them in one format, and so they're kind of different around. So this is so far of my research. Oh, and I do want to make the statement. If there's anything wrong with my speaking today in dates or names, blame Charlotte. No, you're welcome, Charlotte. Charlotte and I have a good working relationship when she worked here, and I really trust her being a historian. I trust her in genealogy work. She's very thorough. She's taught me a lot. And when we get to the second slide, she told me even though it's in the paper, it's not always correct. And sorry, Zach, but that stands true with a lot of going on in the Seymour Daily Tribune when I was a kid. But anyway, you always have to fact check everything. And I know there's a lot of that going on today in society. But Charlotte, a lot of the information I was able to pull up was what some that Charlotte had obtained earlier. The pamphlet that you have, those first 4 pages there, those are information that Charlotte had compiled. So I wanted to make sure that those are pretty detailed. It's articles that came out of not only the Seymour Daily Tribune, the Seymour Republican, the Seymour Democrat, and even the Brownstown Banner. It's amazing that if you live in Brownstown, what information is published about Seymour, especially when you go back into the late 1800s and early 1900s. There's more so in Brownstown mentioned than Seymour. And some of the articles I can see why. This is one of the earliest photos that I could find In fact, I think Billy Wynn gets credit for this one because she had done an article several years ago on the schools of the Seymour Community Schools. And there was another photo that she had also had done, but one of the reasons I like this, now what you have to visualize on this building was built in the late 1869 to 1870. It was opened as a school in 1870. The same year that Meade Shields gave the property for the current, or what was the current Shields High School, or just at that time, Shields School. It was originally a 4-room building that housed not only the high school, but also the elementary. And in 1870, there was just 2 schools in Seymour. Shields, over between 4th and 5th Street, across from Redeemer Lutheran Church, that I went to junior high at when I was a youngster. I was the last freshman class that left to go to high school as a sophomore. And then this building. Now what you see is this building, this is probably late 50s, early 60s. And because of the upside down sign that you see leaning against there, it says Seymour Jackson County Goodwill Center, and I know they did not have 7-Up back in 1870. They did not have the use of aluminum awnings over the 2 front doors, or actually the 1 front door and the 1 entrance door. And in 1870, we didn't have the use of electric lights. Also, those were added later, and I'll mention that later too. But this is what the building did look like originally when it was constructed in 1870, and then opened as a 2-room schoolhouse. The building is brick, sand bricks. They were made on the spot, on site. Travis Carter was the company that did it. Some of you, especially in the Dells in history, Travis Carter was a very big construction company for Seymour. Seymour was growing very fast in the 1850s, all the way through up 1870 and 1900s. Travis Carter also built the original Carnegie Library, which is on this northeast corner of the building, still standing today. Those were used clay brick, whereas this is sand brick. These brick walls are about 2 foot thick. Where it had been painted on the outside of the building that still stands today, those bricks are preserved. Where the exposure of elements on the south side after the one south portion of the building got tore down because of fire, those are deteriorating. But we'll get into that. So it opened up as a school in 1870. Seymour had the 2 schools. Can you go to the next slide, Dawn, please? This is a photograph of Mr. Bowley's book that we have upstairs. Mr. Bowley was actually one of my history teachers. I had him. And like Charlotte had said, you always have to check your facts. I'm not going to tell Mr. Bowley, because I can't. I'm not going to tell him he's wrong. But I am going to make this observation. That is, as best as I can tell from the photographs, the other photographs that I have seen of Shields School when it was built in 1870. And it does appear to be the front steps in the front of the building. And from my research that I was able to find, as it says underneath on the caption, that the first person, front row first person, is Miss Frances Brannaman, is the principal. And the best I can tell from a descendant of the Brannamans, that is her. But if you look up in, also it says, back row center, Professor Lee, teacher of the Colored School located on Laurel Street. Colored School was never on Laurel Street. It's always been on Lynn Street. And Professor Lee was not here in 1870. Professor Lee was one of the latter teachers at the Lynn Street School before it closed. Professor Lee, a very tall gentleman, much of that stature of the gentleman that's on the photograph, passed away, I believe, around 1977. So that date would have been really difficult to pull off. But anyway,